On this week's episode of the Career Coven, I'm so pleased that we are speaking to my dear friend and great human being, Clare Mullen. Clare is the Chief People Officer at a health tech scale-up called Scan.com. She is one of the best people I know, full stop, but definitely the best person I know that works in the division of kind of people and HR. We've had the pleasure of working together at both Thriver and then at my own business, Alva. And she has supported me personally and professionally through some of the most challenging times in my career. And that's something I will always be grateful for. She's undoubtedly one of the women that I learn the most from, someone I always seek advice from whenever anything is happening with people. And also someone who I seek a lot of advice from when it comes to my own career and my own career decisions. So Clare, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the Career Coven with us.
Thank you.
And we thought it would be so helpful to our listeners to talk to someone in your role about how to do a good interview when you want a new job. So what are the tips and tricks from the people side of things? And yeah, that's hopefully where we can focus in on today. And then also, I would love to just ask you a few questions about how you've approached your own career and building that.
Sure, sounds good. Let's go.
Awesome. So, set some context for us. How many people and in which departments do you think you've interviewed over the years of you being in this role?
Okay, so in departments, I think I've interviewed everywhere, within a sort of traditional sort of business structure, everything at every level, including, the sort of last 6+ years in health tech. I think a lot of like the weird and wonderful stuff that you wouldn't necessarily see in other businesses. I've done some proper math around this, and I reckon with a small room for error, probably about 20,000 interviews that I've held and
Oh my
CV
God.
screened, in the six figures, I guess.
That is completely fucking mad.
No wonder I constantly sound husky. That's why.
Did you say that's like 30 people a week?
Yeah, I think 30 people a week for 48 weeks of the year, over 15 years. Some weeks I would definitely interview more than 30. I mean, I've had weeks where it's been well up into the 50 odd. But yeah, I mean, I've, ran temp desks where you were constantly hiring and gone through startup hypergrowth. So yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, we're definitely talking to the right person then. Okay. So let's start with the negatives, always best. If you had to summarize like the most common kind of 3 problems you see in like a first interview setting, what
Yeah.
would you say those are?
The first one is definitely sort of lack of preparedness. And I really speak on behalf of recruiters here in particular, because I think what will often happen is we're seen as like the quick chat, that we hold sort of no real formality there. And so, people will be in their cars, they'll be walking around the streets, they'll be in their offices, giving us kind of mms and yeses and not really being able to have a conversation. They're just not ready for, real kickoff and that intro into you. So that is definitely the first one there. I think the second is that we and this happens when you're interviewing a lot, is that you can just get too into your pitch.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
I've got 20 minutes, I'm going to sell myself, and I'm not going to listen for a single sound. I mean, I've had people that just don't take a breath for 20 minutes, and they'll read me their entire CV, which, I always say beforehand, don't read me it, I can read. That's what's got us to the call.
Yeah.
And they lose such valuable kind of interaction time when it comes to kind of questions and answers.
Yeah.
And then the third is that we don't hold all of the power. This is a 50-50, and you hold some power to you, and you should be asking us the difficult questions. Like, you want to come out of that interview saying, I've got enough information to want to go on to the next stages. Or I've heard what they have to say, this isn't actually the fit for what I'm looking for, and able to kind of write it off pretty quickly there.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's the thing I most often say is like, you should be getting something out of like every interview, including like the first call as the candidate. And if you're not, that in itself is like a red flag. Yeah, I think I've only ever had one like first interview with kind of someone in HR or whatever, where it felt like they were just reading me a list and then there was no time for questions at the end. That's
Mm.
only happened to me once, and I think I like text you straight after to be like, I've had it. I've had the like horrible execution of like a screening call where you feel as a candidate like just quite kind of used almost, because you're like, oh, so you've got everything from me and I've got absolutely nothing from you. So I think that's such good advice.
Mm.
um so I guess, how do you think people can avoid those three common mistakes?
The first is plan your time when it comes to that preparedness. Making sure. I think most people can be flexible when they can kind of screen you. I mean, I kind of work across time zones, so
Yeah,
it's not uncommon for me to be talking to people late into the evening. Making sure that you're not sat in your car. Like, is it somewhere that you can take a call with good Wi-Fi, all that kind of stuff. Those are the basics of how to interview. So get that right. The second is to just listen. Listen at the beginning of those conversations about how that call is going to go. Most of us, whether we're a recruiter, hiring manager, senior exec, we're going to map out why we're on that call, and what our expectations are. So
yeah,
listen for that, and listen for the buy-in signals, and
yeah,
take a
yeah,
breath. Listen to the question, take a
yeah.
beat, and then go into it. I think those are some of the real basics.
Yeah, and you know what I was thinking when you say like take a breath? I think some people get so nervous, right? And one thing I always, when I'm speaking to my friends and stuff who are really nervous about interviews or really nervous about getting a new job, I'm like, the other person on the other side, they want it to go well too. They want you to be the person,
Yeah.
right? They don't want you to fail. Like that.
No.
But I think sometimes we forget that because we just get so nervous about the conversation. So yeah, I think those are all really good.
Yeah, and that there's power in silence as well, right? Like, I mean, it might feel like you've held your breath for a few minutes, but you haven't. It's been seconds, and it's just
Yeah.
giving you time for your nervous system to settle a little bit.
Mm,
Um, and I would much rather you take a minute to think about the answer than just like spew stuff at me that makes no sense,
mm.
and you've just gone on autopilot.
Yeah, you're so right. Okay, so like to go on the other way of looking at it, like
Mm.
what are some of the most amazing or best first interviews you've had? Do you remember any that like really stuck out as kind of extraordinary?
Yeah, I mean, the extraordinary is few and far between. Most of them are just fairly ordinary, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the ones that I've come off the call like really excited to tell people about is where I don't think the call's been long enough. Like, I've come off the call going, I needed another 20 minutes with
Nice.
that person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've still got so much more, or their questions were just really great. They really put me on the spot. I love that. People who are passionate about what their role is.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that you're passionate about what we do. That's, can sometimes be quite dry topic.
Mm,
So you've got to be passionate about what it is that you're doing. You've got to engage in the art of conversation. Don't just kind of save all your questions to the end. You know, we can be slightly informal in the way that we approach these. And so if it feels like we're having a really good conversation, then I'm much more enthused about kind of next stages.
mm,
And you've got to be you've got to be humble. You've got to
yeah,
be
yeah, yeah, yeah.
willing to learn something new. If I interview across levels, and it often happens at that more senior end where it's all about, well, this is what I'm bringing to your business, not this is what I want to learn from your business. And
Mm,
the ways of working that I've learned might not be actually right for your organization, and I'm willing to unlearn them and do something different.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's so true. I remember on another one of these like episodes with Beck, she asked like what are your like top tips or something for someone
Mm.
interviewing, and I was like, the playbook for your last role is not the playbook for this role. And it always just comes across as like both quite arrogant, but also like just devoid of context when you just pretend like, oh, I've done it here and it worked like this. And it's like, well, actually, even if they are really similar businesses, the people are different, the circumstances are different, the expectations will be different. And like, it is never going to be just exactly the same, like rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've definitely had interviews that leave me feeling like, well, they've obviously done a lot, like super capable, but they just don't feel like they're going to be as adaptable. And especially in the pace of business that we work in, I almost feel like adaptable is a non-negotiable in these.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely.
Okay, so as a candidate, as you get past the Clare screening rounds and
If you
you
get past.
progress, if you get past, exactly, um, as you progress through a set of interviews, what should you be trying to get from the employer and be really clear on as you're interviewing for a new job?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. I think you're going to want to know how influential your role is in that organization and who exactly you're influencing. It's not just like the how, it's the who. The other big one for me, and I've seen this question handled so badly on both sides,
Yeah.
is our culture. Quite often,
Mm,
candidates will ask to describe our culture, but they'll not really know what they're looking for in the response. I've
yeah.
also sat in on interviews throughout the years of being a consultant and watched, even at founder level, people really struggling to answer that.
Yeah.
Plain and simple, culture is how you get things done, how you
Yeah.
talk to one another, and how you get that business moving.
Yeah.
And you, at the end of your decision making process as a candidate, when they're sat there with that offer, you should be very comfortable in knowing that this is how this business talks to one another. And that the
Mm,
way that they talk to one another and that the way that they get things done absolutely aligns with who I am.
yeah. And this is definitely something where I just know that I don't do this well, even though like I should do it well by this stage. I'm like a constant like I will just close my eyes to those red flags. I will see the cultural red flag. I'll log it in my brain, and then I'll be like, "Oh, I can change that." And I think that like it's I'm sure that is human nature, but definitely it is really important to like get clear on what you're entering into. Doesn't have to be perfect, right? But you have to know that like your kind of, I guess, your ability to operate within it is really strong. And yeah, I mean, founders obviously know how to like pitch their culture, but
Mm,
I mean, more often than not, I do think that that is like hot air, right? Like, you know, they pitch their values and all of that, and values on the wall, but values aren't, they're not culture, right? They're not, and it's how they're lived and it's how they're rewarded and it's how they like go through the everyday, to your point of like, it's actually how you get things done that
mm.
I think often goes very left unsaid, actually.
Yeah. And it's, there, I always, whenever kind of we're talking about a role to hire for and who should be on that hiring team, I always talk about how we test for values in every single stage in the process. And that can sometimes be repeating the same question to see if we get different answers from the candidate. In the same way, you as a candidate should be asking every single person that you interact with
Yeah,
for that
yeah,
role that one same question and
yeah,
then comparing those answers. Because if they are wildly different, then
yeah,
people show you who they are. The flags are there, and
yeah,
regardless of your skill level,
yeah,
you
yeah,
can't change those.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it's like a complete naivety and like it's always wrong. For me,
yes,
it's like I'm always wrong about being like, oh, I can change that, and then you're like, I can't fucking change that. Like they
no,
were there before me, they'll be there after me. Like you can't. There are some things you just can't change.
yeah, but also to counter that is that one of the things I also say when I'm asked that question is that I can tell you what it's like today.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can't tell you what it's like in 20 heads later, because
yeah,
every time you go through that step change, your culture shape shifts, and it should. If your culture is
yeah.
not
Agreed.
changing, then you are not innovating as an organization.
Yeah,
And again, it goes back to it's not that static, you
yeah,
know,
agreed.
poster. So it's okay to constantly reinvent that answer because, we're going, as a scaling business at Scam, we're constantly seeing our culture evolve, and
Mm.
it's only right that that should happen.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's not to say that you like, especially in certain roles, right? You also do have a lot of agency to like change and establish the culture and to establish a different way of doing things. Um, but yeah, I think if you do kind of see a kind of consistent, I guess, value or a consistent behavior that is like so common in the interviews across everyone, and that's not something that you like, then I think that's something to really, really think about. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think I just still have like a bit of naivety about that stuff, even though I know you and I know I should be asking and I know what I should be asking. It's just so much harder to apply it to yourself.
Oh, I mean, the best advice givers are the worst advice takers.
Well,
So yeah.
thank you for that, because I know I give it out so freely. I dish it like amazingly, and then when it comes to me, I'm like a complete fucking mess.
You
Anyway,
both.
great. Okay, last one on, I guess, getting a new job.
Yeah.
The employment market is a bit challenging right now. It's been like choppy for the last, I guess, like 12 to 18 months. At the CV stage, do you have any tips and tricks to stand out in a positive way?
Hmm.
And also, what do you think of like those like videos and looms that people can attach their CV? Like, is that something you like? Does that work?
Okay. Um, so the CV stage, I think that what we all do is that we dust off our CV when we're in a bad mood, we've had a really shitty day, and we're like, I'm going to look for something new. And that means that we're not really putting all of our like effort or critical thinking into it at all. Your CV needs to be a living, breathing document that you're constantly keeping up to date. If you are sending your CV out en masse because maybe that's just where you are, and we don't all have those kind of different luxuries in career
Yeah,
search,
yeah,
then you've got to make sure that it is absolutely accurate in comparison to your LinkedIn or whatever. If you send me a CV, we get on a call, and I find out that CV is a year out of date, the interview's done,
you're
because
done.
I can't have a conversation with you based on something that's not in front of me. So keep
Yeah,
it as a living, breathing document. Get advice on it. I think
yeah, for
that kind
sure.
of get some eyes on there. Keep it simple, but don't roll it out every time you're in a bad mood and want to find a new job, because that's just going to set you up for failure.
Great
Uh,
advice. Great advice.
I think also that don't just rely on direct application. A lot of
Mm,
roles won't hit the open market, and that will be because we've had referrals
yeah,
for someone
yeah.
to speak to. We've made opportunistic hires. Recruiters love an opportunistic hire. HR people hate
Mm,
them for a multitude of reasons. But sometimes people will just be introduced to us that is the right person, and we're kind of crafting a role that would have
yeah.
come eventually. We're bringing it forward. So, follow those businesses that are of interest, reach out to the relevant decision makers. There are ways that you can do this really badly. Don't be
Mm,
spamming everyone with your CV. Does not look good.
yeah, yeah.
Really target the people that are relevant to the role that you're doing and that have some sort of authority in that kind of decision making process.
Mm,
It's not a back door. You're still going to go through a process.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's not a golden ticket, but it is a good way to get access to some things that wouldn't have come out to the market.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I don't know, I think I'm sort of mixed at this. But on the point of it not being a back door, we've talked a lot in the past about like I have occasionally been offered roles like very, very quickly that didn't have any process. And that has also been, as a candidate, like a huge red flag for me. Because if it's like,
Mm,
oh, you're willing to offer me like a C-suite role and you haven't like I haven't met anyone but you haven't given me any kind of case, you have like that to me is like a completely insane way to like bring someone in, especially at, even if it's a small business, like at a kind of senior, like in
yeah,
quotation marks level. So I think there is, just because as you say it's like not a formalized like public application process, doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a good process for a candidate to go through. And I think it's a bit of a red flag if you feel that there isn't any process at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've got to be
Yeah,
talking to a good few people in that organization, particularly at that more senior level as well. So,
yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
there
For
should still
sure.
be something.
And the other last question, I guess, just on this is like, so as you know, when I stopped being a founder, I found it quite difficult to apply my generalist skill set to then a vertical role. So
Mm,
I looked at product, I looked at operations. Those are like, for me, were like the main two. And I guess I always felt almost a bit of imposter syndrome in either of those, because I was actually just more of a generalist in what I'd done
mm,
over the last few years. I have spoken to other founders who have found it quite challenging at the moment to get through just the CV screening process, because they don't necessarily have the skills that like AI screening bots or like people are actually looking for specific roles. What advice would you have for the generalist or the former founder in those situations?
yeah. Just to go back to the point about the Loom videos, which I didn't answer,
Oh yeah,
apologies.
yeah, yeah. Please
Um,
do, please do.
so I, various tools have been out over the years for this, and they've never really come to like fruition. I think that I don't see that as ever replacing the CV in its current format.
Nice.
And I think that it really kind of discounts a lot of particularly neurodiverse candidates
Yeah,
from the process. In
yeah.
terms of founders and how they present themselves to the open market as a candidate, I think the reality is that the traditional um, approach of applying for formal roles that are advertised just isn't the right way to get your foot in the door for a
Mm,
number of reasons. This market, it's saturated with really great candidates, and I think the reality is that businesses will be able to really hone in on the skills that they're looking for.
yeah,
And sometimes that just doesn't come through in your more generalist CV. I think there's also a little bit of fear about hiring an ex
founders.
founder.
Yeah.
Are they going to be comfortable suddenly reporting into someone as an employee? Are they just there for the short term while they figure out what it is that they want to do? All those kind of
The
things start
question that
bubbling.
I get asked the most is a version of that
Yeah.
inverted. Easily, easily.
Yeah, but there's also that dynamic of like working then with another founder and kind of the power dynamic. So there's a lot there to think about. I
Mm,
think the best way for ex founders to get in the door of organizations that they want to work with as a genuine employee
yeah,
is through that sort of direct approach and
yeah.
introductions, and more traditional headhunters who are exceptional at what they do. I think those are the best ways.
Yeah, I have definitely found that headhunters have been very useful because you can
Mm,
get to know them and then they can position you like well for something that they know is kind of either coming on or a problem that could be solved even as a contractor.
mm,
Um, yeah, I think full disclosure, all of my roles, all of my permanent roles since being a founder, I think have come through the network, not not a role that's been publicly applied for.
mm,
And it's not to say that I haven't gone for processes where there has been a job application route in, um, but they just haven't been the ones that I ended up like landing in. But so yeah, it's interesting to know, and I think yeah, to I guess validate what you're saying is other founders that I have given similar advice to, which is like you've just got to find a different way in. You've got to meet someone. You've got to build a network, um, which, in fairness, founders are often good at. Right? They often
yeah.
can go out and like build a network, but that is how most people coming from that background have landed a job. As far as my small network would say.
Mhm.
Okay, now on to you. On to you. I'm curious about your career because you had like a very successful time as a freelancer, as a contractor with your own business, being your own boss, and you have now gone full time into a scale up. Um, how have you thought about your own career over the last kind of 10 years, and has it all had a clear plan?
Absolutely no plan.
You're like
To
me
quote,
then.
yeah, to quote Phoebe Buffet, I don't even have a plan. There's been nothing. I think, and I think that worked though because of the industries that we were in. Like you don't go into a startup for to collect your gold carriage clock at the end of your career. Like
Yeah, for
there's
stability. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I think when I went into freelancing. Uh, I wasn't really sure that it was going to be successful. Didn't ever imagine it would be as successful as it was. And I knew I would always step away from it for the right thing. I think once you're in it and you're running through it, you quickly realize that the opportunities for career development are a lot less.
Yeah.
And so, when I met the guys at scan.com, they were 10 people, and it was supposed to be a 3-month quick job to get them going, and that turned into a year and a half of consulting. And by that point I could see what the business was going to become, and I
Mm.
didn't want to hand it over to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it was mine,
Yeah.
and thankfully they agreed to get me on. And I think that's where I then saw the opportunity for career development, that I was like, this
Yeah.
is, if I'm going to really commit as an
Mm.
employee to this kind of organization, then the reward for that commitment is that they're committing to my career growth.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, it's interesting because the freelance or the contract to perm transition, if you can land it, is like such a nice way into a role. Like, I was talking to another founder about this uh a few days ago, and I just said, the perfect way is like the try before you buy model. And it's hard to execute, right? Like, you did 10 years, or you did many years where you didn't find that one, and it was
Mm.
only, you know and I remember how many months where you were like, this could be the one, this, I think, like this. And I was
Like
like,
dating.
and it was exciting, but it
Yeah.
was gradual as well for you, as you like saw where it was going and the leadership skills of like your team now, and how it was evolving. I remember you thinking, okay, this is really different, and I'm really enjoying it, I love working there, and they're thinking really differently about the organization and what they do. That was definitely how I saw my own
Mm.
freelancing. What I loved about freelancing was that you don't commit to a culture. You can be
Yes.
one step removed. I found you could be a lot more frank with
Yes.
leadership about your observations, because you don't have to have loads of friends. They
No.
don't have to like you really. They just have to kind of respect you. The freelance to perm model did not work out for me, but I still wouldn't rule it out. I would definitely do that again, because I do like the power of being a freelancer. Like, no question. I see huge benefits, but I also agree with you that it is capped, and at some point you often do feel like, I'm not quite in. All this
Yes.
exciting stuff is happening, and I'm not quite in the
Yeah,
exciting stuff.
absolutely. And I think there's only so much that you can do as a consultant.
Yeah,
Like, you're there to kind of be like, well, these are your options, pick A, B, or C,
yeah,
and then we'll roll that out.
yeah,
But that's when it begins and ends. And I think when you start to want more, like, you're just not going to
yeah.
get that in the world.
Okay, so on your if you were speaking to someone who did want to go freelance, so was doing the other
Mm,
thing, going from a role, but was thinking like, I don't know, I'm not loving my role, etc., like, what tips would you give for someone thinking of starting a career as a freelancer?
okay. This could start to feel like a book because there's so
Maybe
many.
it is a book.
Maybe it is a book. I think the first thing is, why do you want to do it? Really think about the why. And naively, I thought that becoming a freelancer would give me work-life balance.
Oh, me
Oh,
too.
it's like, I'm going to work 4 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
Every
Mm-hmm.
Friday, I'm just going to go and do my own thing, going to read books, like, just going to be so chill.
Amen.
You, all of, the the person, you've got the image in the head, they're wearing a gilet and they've funded a business through their parents' money, and they're
Yeah.
telling you
Yep. Yep. Yep.
that
Yep. Yep.
you'll, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, and it's
Yeah.
all
All that
bollocks.
fucking nonsense. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I quickly realized that you will never work harder, you'll never have a day off, and it's lonely. So you really got to think about the why.
Yeah.
Um, you've also got to realize that what you're selling is you. You are
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah. You're the
product,
product. Yeah. You're the product.
and you're going to have to take like some emotion out of that and learn how to be a product and learn whether the market needs or wants your product. I had been
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
tech
That's such a
space
good point.
for a while, and I was like, people are coming to me always asking for advice. I'll
Mm.
easily be a freelancer. Months of like nothing when I decided
Mm.
to do it, because I hadn't thought about myself as a product
Product.
off the shelf. Um,
Yeah.
that's definitely one. I think that you need to build a community of experts around you in their different fields. Like,
Yeah.
thank God for my accountant who really like
Oh, amen.
kept me in check. Otherwise, when I wrapped up my business, I would have owed so much money. Because in those
Yeah.
early days, when it starts coming in, you're like, "Oh, I'm so
Yeah.
rich."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and
so
because no one can work out like tax in their head. It's like both this thing of like, okay, it would seem like I'm much richer than I've ever been. But
yes,
then it's like, but then just cut it in half because you still have to pay tax on this. But yeah, I always found that a very odd thing at the end of the month where I was like, am I rich? Am I poor? I
yeah,
don't know.
could go either way.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think, and on that point is being really financially prepared for it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
whatever you
agreed.
think you need, double it, because
Yeah,
it really will take a few months to get going. Um, and when I say build a community of experts, I also think about it really managing that community as well. Like, it's a community, not a city. You don't, there's so many advice givers
oh,
around you who'll
yeah.
be like, it'll come, the right thing will come, just keep, they've never been freelance, they've never been freelance in your industry, but yet they will give you all this advice about how to find clients.
Yeah.
It's the same people that tell you how to date that have never been on a dating app. They're the exact
Yeah,
same
yeah,
people.
yeah. The, like,
When you're
married
not
couple that
looking,
met at 16 that tell you how to date. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when you're not looking, the right man will come along. Great. I'll do that,
Thank you.
Janet. Thanks. You've just saved me so much money. And then I think the other is being really prepared to negotiate. Like, it's telling someone to know their worth is one thing, but like, you are going to, work with a variety of different clients at different sizes,
Yeah,
and what you think you're worth is not necessarily what the market thinks you're worth. So you
yeah,
really got to prepare to kind of negotiate that, but also protecting your IP as you grow, because it's
yeah.
as you start to build that reputation that you can kind of start to think about those fees.
Yeah, I think the how you price yourself is so difficult, in particular for women. I
Mm,
think you know, there are just very few people that will openly share their day rate with you. Like, I think you can, as you say, have like a community of people that will do that, but are they in your area of expertise? Like, do they know your vertical? Like, often not. I think that, yeah, for me, the way I started to think about it was, you know, what's the minimum I think I'm worth? And then I'd always add 20% because I just thought I was undervaluing myself. I thought, like, as a woman and with my personality, I will always just slightly like neg on myself. So what's that number? Add 20%. And then you're probably at, for me, I was like, I'm probably at my bottom number then.
yeah.
But then the other thing I see a lot of, which I think is incredibly fucking naive, and I'm sure that you have thoughts on, is I see a lot of people that go to like pre-seed or seed stage startups with day rates that are extraordinarily high. And you're like, know who you're talking to. Like, if this is a pre-revenue business, that number the number you quote should take into account the fact that this business doesn't yet make any money, right? And
Yeah.
if you aren't commercial enough as a freelancer to be able to know your audience and pitch a number that will be within their bracket, I
Mm,
think you are, that in itself for me is a red flag to hire a consultant. Like if someone gives me a wild day rate, I'm just like, okay, not only is that a no, but that shows me that this entire thing has been a waste of time because you don't understand that I'm in a tiny company and we would
yeah,
never entertain that number. Um,
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
there's that context as well. And like, and if you really want to work somewhere, you can also lower your number. Like no one's, no one's controlling what you do. If you like love a business or it's a charity or something, and I know we've had this conversation before
yeah,
specifically about charities, it's like if you really want to do it, you can do it. You just have to, you just have to
yeah.
think
And I
about how to
think,
balance
like,
it.
when you talk about yourself being a product as well, is that you can also be multiples of products. And so, like, you don't have to deliver this one off the shelf package
Yeah. Yeah.
into the same. Or, like, one of the things that I was very good at, if I do, don't mind me saying, is that I very quickly was able to kind of demonstrate to people that there was no, for me at least, there was no idea of a plug and play response to the HR needs of your
Yeah.
business. That I was coming in to tailor what you needed at your stage.
Yeah.
Working with you on Alva versus, working with some of the other clients I had that were, growing internationally. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally
none of that
different.
stuff would have worked for Alva.
No.
And I think that is something that, again, I think a lot of consultants forget, is that they can strip back, and that ultimately affects their rate.
Yeah. Yeah. You're totally right.
The
Okay.
final one there, sorry, is also go to therapy.
Oh, lovely. Why?
God, because it's so lonely. Like, as
Mm,
much as, I would be able to reach out to people like you, or, my brother's a freelancer, like, no one, or the professional advice givers who just love to give advice, no one is there when you switch that light off at night inside your head
yeah.
worrying about how you're paying the bills. Even if
Yeah.
you've got a partner, they are not inside your brain.
Agreed.
You need to get that out somewhere. And
Mm,
I mean, as much as I'm so lucky that it was successful, but it could have gone the other way, and that could have really been disastrous.
mm.
And you need, I mean, everyone should be in therapy, but like, you do need someone to talk to about this.
Well, you're both lucky because luck is in everything, but you're also very talented and very prepared and very skilled. So, also that. But you are right. Like, I think it is very hard. That's the same with like one pet peeve I have is that people often talk about like their own freelance organization or like the narrative is like that's not founding. Founding is only
Mm,
when you build a team. And I'm like, that is fucking
fuck
rubbish.
you.
That is
Founded that business.
yeah, exactly. And it's reductive and it's actually offensive.
Yeah.
I think that really needs to just like be silenced. Like if you are running your own one man agency, that is
Yeah.
as fucking stressful to you as it would be running X kind of team.
Yeah.
And I I do not think there is enough spoken about like the experience of freelancers or sole founders in their own companies because there is just this like very reductive view of like, well, founding is like building a huge X. And I'm like, oh, can we just get over that? That is just fucking rubbish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I was everything. I was
Yeah,
several people, and you know, the money that business brought in was because I was being several people and not employing several people.
yeah, yeah.
That. And yeah, it's that's just so insulting to say that.
Mm. And I think on the point of like the finance and like, how you manage your own emotions as well. One thing I found interesting when I was freelancing is like you'd have these periods where you were so busy and you'd be like, I'm making a ton. And or like relatively I'm doing pretty well. And then
Mm.
you'd have those droughts. And in the drought, you'd then do tons of business development and then you'd win three more contracts and then you'd burn out. And then you'd like this cycle of constantly being like busy, 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 contracts end, no work. Oh my God, I've got to get some contracts. And then like and that, I think, to your point about like therapy and self-management, like that is a roller coaster that you need support with managing, because I found that I worked I worked very hard whatever I do. So I worked really hard when I was a freelancer, but that cycle was new to me, of like the the rain and the drought and whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so hard to navigate that, at least in the first instances where it happens, because when the drought hits, you panic.
Yeah.
Um, but also, I struggled actually with the other side of that, which was turning work away.
Mm,
And I remember having a coaching session with Evgeny, who is the ex-founder, CEO of Makers Academy, and just him asking that really simple question of like, what honestly happens if you say no? Like,
mm.
and literally nothing happens. Those people come back later,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you've got room to say yes. But I was like, I can't say no to anyone, because if I say no, like I'll never get any work again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're so right.
Yeah,
You're
the
so right. That's
famine
brilliant.
was actually sometimes a little easier than the feast.
Mm, mm. Okay, right. Last two questions, and I'll combine them for brevity. Is there anything that you're particularly proud of, or that you particularly regret in your career? What are those things and why?
Um, I mean, I'm proud of, because it only happened recently, like wrapping up the business and actually walking away with some cash out of it.
Lovely.
At the end of all of that, when you've paid yourself, I rented out an office, which was an absolute ego move. Definitely one of those regrets. But you've done that. You've paid for your website build, all of those things. And at the end of that 6 years, that I walked away with a lump sum, is that was that real moment of being like, you are actually very good at what you do,
Yeah.
and you
Self
deserve that.
recognition. Yeah.
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 I think I don't know if it's really a regret, because I would argue that it sort of got me to here. But I do think that I stepped into my first ever head of position too early in my career.
Mm.
And not only was it too early to be in that role, I also didn't do enough due diligence about the organization to see how they would support someone new to that role.
Yeah.
And I think that I had to learn a lot of stuff very, very quickly, and really the hard way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you could then argue that it ultimately kind of set me on a path to
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I am. But if I'd go back, I'd maybe
You might
just
change
take,
it.
yeah, I'd change that up.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for chatting to us. And thank you to everyone for listening to this week's episode. Make sure that you like and subscribe, and let us know if you have any feedback. Claire, what a pleasure. I'll chat
Thanks.
to you soon, because I always chat to you.
Straight after this.
Yeah, right after this. Okay,
Bye.
bye.